My name is Simon Glass. I'm the CEO and founder of Qodeo, and you'll learn a bit more about what we do today. It's my probably sort of almost 10th time here in Malta. Haven't been back since the pandemic, so it's great to be back. We are a business that's very committed to getting venture capital firms to connect with entrepreneurs and vice versa to make the fundraising journey much simpler and easier. And we found in particular that locations like Malta, Singapore, smaller and sometimes seemingly more regional locations, entrepreneurs can find it harder to access capital. So hopefully today you'll learn a few things about what we do, and I'd love to get you on the platform. So you'll see later on there's going to be a discount coupon you can take down. Wow, Qodeo will give you 50% off our service, which hopefully many of you will sign up for after today. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start the presentation. We have a presentation first of all, then with a video that hopefully will work. And then there's always technical glitches with these things. And then we're going to open up the panel to discuss some various thoughts. So we've got a very esteemed panel here. We'll introduce in a second, and we'll let them introduce themselves when we actually sort of go to the panel section, because some of you obviously are internally networked here and know each other, but many people don't know each other. And then we'll go to the audience, both the online audience. We have an online audience globally. A lot of Maltese folks have signed up to join online today, but this is actually being live streamed on YouTube and on through Zoom globally. And there'll be a video made of this event, which we'll get to you probably a week or two after the event itself, which you can watch if you want to later, which will also be distributed globally. So we're trying to get a bit more attention for Malta as a very interesting location for businesses and entrepreneurs. So if I start, I hope it's going to work here. There we are. First page. It's very small. I apologize for the size of the TV, but I'll sort of talk you through a bit. So today on our panel, we have Anna-Maria Panter, who's based here in Malta and helped pull this together. So I want to give a special thanks to Anna-Maria. We've worked in various ways with her in the past and been here on many occasions to work with her. Next, Philip Camilleri, who's a fantastic sort of Maltese entrepreneur who's gone to the US and made his fortune and is obviously coming backwards and forwards to the island to try and help local entrepreneurs and others in the market. So we'll have Philip tell us more about his background when we open up for the panel. And then we have Stanley Mifsud. I'm sorry if I don't get the pronunciations quite right. From the Malta Investment Company, which is apparently advises government here on policy, from what I understand, in terms of how to help entrepreneurs and the entrepreneurial community. Then we have Anthony Gatt, who's a Malta enterprise, and they have an enterprise agency here of the government, from what I understand, which helps both again with policy, but also with getting entrepreneurial programs in place, conferences, activities, funding activities, etc. And last but not least, on the end of the panel, we have Abigail. We haven't had a chance to talk to Abigail yet directly, so I know less about her, except that she's obviously from the Chamber of SMEs, so small and medium-sized enterprises here, and we'll let Abigail tell you a bit about her background and what she does for entrepreneurs here. So that's the panel today. So after the presentation, we'll go to the panel, discuss various ideas the panel have discussed already that are issues for the Maltese market in trying to access venture capital and private equity and funding sources like that. And then we'll open up to both people here and also online. There'll probably be some questions that come in, and Monica from our team will voice some of those questions that come in online. So this is the moment of truth that the video actually works. Of course, I can't find my mouse on the video.
Did you realize the average entrepreneur and investor relationship lasts longer than most marriages? So you want to make sure you find the right match. Just like in love, there's a perfect match for entrepreneurs and investors. Qodeo automatically matches entrepreneurs with best fit investors, saving you time and money kissing frogs. Revolutionizing the way entrepreneurs and investors match and get funding, businesses of all sizes can set up a profile in just 5 minutes and gain access to a world of opportunities for just $9.95 a month. And for a little more, Qodeo's concierge service can help you improve your profile so you attract the right investor even faster. Whether a startup or an established business looking to evolve, Qodeo connects you with opportunities far beyond your own traditional network. Always on the hunt, Qodeo instantly notifies you when your preferred match is found. No long courting process or middleman required. Qodeo helps you confidently connect directly with best fit investors worldwide, giving you access to more than 1,800 leading venture and private equity firms, pre-vetted by 30 of the world's top business schools. Qodeo matches you with the right funding fast.
So that's a very brief video about what we are and what we do, because kind of just about work there. So we are a platform, and so you can onboard onto our platform either for €0, €10 or €20 a month, and get automated shortlists coming through to you on the potential investors for your business. And what we do is when you sign up to Qodeo, you give us a little bit of information about your entrepreneurial business. Our algorithms then automatically rank and grade matches for you potentially to venture or private equity funders. Now, we work less in the angel space now. We may sort of go into that space later, but a lot of businesses here could be venture or private equity funded if they were aware and able to be part of that kind of community or part of that network. And in fact, as the video said, the voiceover is 1,800 VCMP firms. We now have about 6,200 or 6,500 VCMP firms active on the platform or on the platform in some kind of way. So entrepreneurs on our platform can shortlist who they want to talk to. They can reach out to VCs. Some VC and private equity firms prefer not to be reached out to because they prefer to the other way around. So in many cases, VC and PE firms do the opposite of what you do, and they actually look to see what kind of opportunities there are. And we're talking this morning in some of the meetings today here in Malta about issues that entrepreneurs have in markets like Malta, where there isn't really a VC community yet, but in many places that's been the case. I used to work in Cambridge in the UK. I worked for the one VC in town, and now there are about 5 or 6. And there are sort of similar circumstances, places like Israel, where there was virtually no venture activity, but lots of entrepreneurship a few years ago. Venture firms started to then follow the demand from entrepreneurs and start to establish. But in that interim period, it was very hard for entrepreneurs to know where to go, and in many cases had to go offshore outside the island in the circumstance to try to identify who to try and raise money from. So what we do is short circuit that process, because it's very hard to know where to start, and give you these ranked matches, and then recommend you then pursue the what we call warm matches or hot matches afterwards. And we say it's like dating because it's just the same in terms of if you want to try and actually match an entrepreneur to investor, obviously after money. So we obviously say it's looking for money, although online dating is probably after money as well in some circumstances. But you know, we different kind of ways. But we are saying basically that if you know what your interests are, what your you know, how your profile looks effectively on our platform, that will get picked up and matched automatically against those who are in your kind of space. And that's very similar to dating, that kind of sense that, you know, if you're a male of X age or a woman of X age, you're looking for somebody with similar characteristics, that happens. And this happens automatically on the platform. So it's incredibly similar in some senses philosophically in terms of how to try and talk to the right people at the right time. And so we'd encourage you to get onto our platform and say, well, come back later with the discount coupon. So what's the problem in the venture and private equity community? Well, entrepreneurs, obviously, many of you, how many entrepreneurs here? People seeking funding of some kind of sort. So about sort of half the audience, perhaps seeking capital of some sort. So entrepreneurs need capital. Why do they need capital? They need it to grow their businesses, and they need smart funding as well as dumb money, as we call it. So entrepreneurs need the cash, but they also need the smarts to try and help grow their businesses. And if you're in a remote market, like a place like Malta, and you want to grow into the European market, for instance, you may want to have a venture firm that has experience about how to market your kind of products there. You obviously lack relationships, and that's very difficult in places that aren't London or Berlin or New York or the Bay Area to actually get to know who these people are and to get them find some way into them. So you lack relationships. But in the same way, and people often forget about the other side, the investors themselves have very narrow networks. So one of our advisory board is a Harvard Business School professor, and he said 80% of venture capitalists in America he either taught or went to Harvard Business School. It's probably more like 40%, but it's still very dominant. So it means that people tend to do business with people they often know through their own networks. That's classically how venture tends to work. The problem with that, and there's a Harvard Business case about this, is that actually, if you invest in people like you, whilst there's a comfort zone around, you actually miss out on opportunities and you get low returns. So there's actually data showing lower returns for venture capital firms to invest in people like them rather than those who go outside that. The other issue, obviously, is the FOMO issue, the fear of missing out. And many venture and private equity firms are concerned. So one of the top VCs in America showed us an email from the head of the VC firm in the Bay Area last year, showing how the boss is one of the top firms, you'd know who they are, because they're sort of publicly quite well known, but I won't name them right now. but how they'd missed out on a particular opportunity because they didn't have access to other kind of networks, and that opportunity went on to do very well, and they missed out on that particular home run. So they miss out on opportunities as well, although they're coming later to the party to understand that. So if VCs, if venture capital firms and private equity firms can find opportunities in markets they wouldn't find usually, often at lower valuations, often with reasons for why those companies are coming from those locations, etc., that is actually a value add to them as well. So that bring the two parties together and cutting the noise is actually what another venture firm called it in the US, cutting down the noise and the inbound deal flow that's called for the venture firms on the one hand. So those who want to raise the money, they can look at them, and helping the entrepreneurs on the other hand to identify where to start their journey. We're not the only process you need to go through and try to raise money, but it's useful to know who's who in the Zoom, who to go and talk to first of all. So we have a solution. If you go to our website, we just actually relaunched the website. We realize obviously on the website itself and on the video just saw we talk about kissing frogs, which is an English analogy. I was in America the other day in Miami, and they weren't quite so familiar with that phrase. And they, we've got to be careful when we go to Paris if we say kissing frogs, but as a Brit. But it's kind of the idea is basically there's a phrase kissing frogs where you talk, you're trying to talk to the wrong people, you're matching up against the wrong people. We want to try and save you time and money and effort in going down the wrong process. So if you log on to Qodeo.com, you can learn more about the business, and you can sign up very simply in a few minutes to use the service. Now, so everybody here today gets 50% off if you sort of sign up using this WOW Qodeo discount you'll see later. And that a year is $99.95. So 50% off, that's €50 for a year of service for what we call concierge. And in that concierge product, we actually help review profiles of entrepreneurs and help make them more matchable by seeing some of the kind of the traits they ought to be representing on their profile to make them more matchable to VCs. Again, the dating analogy very similar there. You want to enhance your profile to look as attractive as possible to the other party. And very similarly, you often see that entrepreneurs, particularly in markets which are not classic venture capital markets, might undersell their story. So you often think entrepreneurs oversell their story. They may oversell what they think the business will be worth in a few years' time, but they tend to undersell what they're doing now, or ask for too little money, or not be realistic about what the other party wants. So in a concierge service, which will automate next year, but at the moment is done in a very manual way, including some Zoom interviews, we help the entrepreneur understand how they might be able to change their profile slightly to make themselves more attractive to venture capital firms. So one of the ways that we do our business, so we collect data from entrepreneurs who go into the system, but we obviously have to have the data on the venture capital and private equity firms on the other side. And for those who aren't familiar, venture capital is generally earlier stage investing into newer businesses, usually in technology or biotechnology. Private equity is the part of the market where it's later stage, it's called. So mid-market opportunities where it might be an established business, where there's family succession going on, or a business wants to grow in some kind of way into new markets and wants equity, basically where you're giving equity away in some kind of way to an investor to help grow your business. So, and we cater towards both the private equity and the venture ends of the spectrum. But so when we want to gather our data, we have lots of VCs on the platform, as you can see. But what we would like to do is interview them in person where possible to try and get qualitative information as well as quantitative information about how they do business. There's a lot of data out there, but data is very confusing. Most people aren't interested in data. They want a solution rather than data. And the problem with the data is it tends to be historic and reported and partial. So when you look at databases, it's very hard to work out what's going on. Whereas actually, if you interview a venture capital firm, you tend to eyeball them and get far more information from them. So we work with about 30 business schools around the world, as was mentioned before in the video, and Cambridge University Judge Business School, which is my alma mater, but is one of the places that we work with. And we had a student so we work with students whose business schools go and interview venture capital and private equity firms around the world, gather data about, and that goes in our database, and that goes through our algorithms and enables these matches to occur. And so we get really interesting insights. So right before the pandemic, obviously not knowing what was about to happen the following year, we sent an Italian student, that turned out, from Cambridge University to interview VC and PE firms in Italy, did a lot of interviews in Italy and Malta, and he came down here and he met with some folks. Now, obviously at the time, and still to a certain extent, there's not a lot of VC or private activity directly in the island, but he did effectively a series of interviews with people around the space to try and get a sense of what was going on here. And some of the things we might discuss with the panel and some of the questions that might come up relate to these kind of issues he had. So everybody who comes here today will get a free copy of this report, but we also, it's a short report because Malta at the time was a very nascent community in venture capital, but we have a series of reports like this in different markets. So if you're an entrepreneur trying to raise money, you understand what's going on in the mindset of venture capital firms, etc. So there was a short report put out of Malta, and he picked up on a number of kind of themes, we call these factoids, themes that were present here, which probably are still quite important. So obviously trust is important. Startups, somebody here said a management innovation program here in Malta said this researcher of ours, trust is important. Startups are not honest enough in the pitches. That's a bit of a double-edged sword, but what I was saying before about entrepreneurs often not asking for enough, but they often have rather over high expectations. It was actually very interesting. I was at a conference in North Carolina about a week ago in the US, and one of the venture capital firms saying he'd much rather an entrepreneur would tell him, I have 2 paying customers or wherever it might be, than, as well as I might have X thousand in a few years' time, but rather than say, rather than sort of fudge numbers and stuff. So they often venture capitalists would rather know there's something as a test case, you're testing something out, and tell them honestly what's going on. And obviously entrepreneurs try to sell their proposition, but be honest in that pitch. It's a bit like dating again. If people aren't honest in the dating game, things go wrong in many cases. And similarly, you need to try and be honest in that process. And I think perhaps there's ambition without necessarily always awareness that there's a due diligence process that goes on the other side. There was a lot of discussion of angels. I know some of the folks here today will talk about other sources of finance as well that are complementary to the venture capital. So we'd suggest there are other ways of raising money as well as venture capital. And in many cases, in a place like Malta, there's a combination that works of what's called business angels, early stage investors, plus government grants, plus maybe loans. We'll talk about this perhaps later. Traditionally, business angels like to be close to where their investments are. It's not always the case now, it's slightly changed. And we as a business based in the UK, now US, actually have a number of investors in multiple geographies, but it's because of in our own business, but that's because of the history of the business effectively. But one of the conversations we had today, and I'm sure it'll come out later, was around the issue of trying to build that angel community inside Malta. Actually, we were talking about this before, so how you can try and build that community. And one of the things for an angel community that's important is have the next stage of the pipeline, i.e. the venture or private equity process available. So not only can they maybe get an exit and actually get value out of that entrepreneurial business they've invested into, but also that business can grow and find growth funding. But you need the underpinnings in many cases, so you can actually fund business as they grow. What else was found out? So there was a lot of talk, and we'll maybe talk about this on the panel, about how entrepreneurial Malta is. I mean, when I first came here about 4 or 5 years ago, I first came to Malta, and I was struck by the entrepreneurship, not just in early stage tech, but also in the mid-market effectively. So there's a lot of entrepreneurship here, but there are concerns about attitudes about, quotes, failure, what happens if a business goes wrong, about the fact it's a very small place. So we tend to see in fascinating island communities that are active in Singapore and Bermuda and other island communities. A lot of people know a lot of people. I'm sure here today in the networking, a lot of people know each other already. And there's a concern that if something goes wrong, what do you do in that kind of circumstance? How do you handle it? It's much harder in a small community than a big community where you kind of, but if there's something that doesn't work, you can kind of move on more easily. And also it's a cultural thing. So we'll talk maybe about culture. There are some sectors that have come out. I know some today from the gaming space here, it's blockchain, online gaming. There are various sectors seem to be emerging here and various entrepreneurs coming here to help support those entrepreneurial sectors. And so venture capital firms will tend to look to see, it's a supply and demand game. If there are lots of people seeking capital in a certain kind of industry, that might help also generate that venture community. A shortage of later stage investors, that's something longer term that hopefully would begin to evolve here, because we're having some conversation this morning actually about where next and what's happening next. And there's still a reason is not yet a venture capital community on the island, but that's not impossible. It's a very populated place, a lot of connections, a big diaspora from Malta. We're talking before about in Australia, there are a huge number of Maltese descended people. There's lots of connections globally that the community here could pull on in various ways and try and attract people to come back in here to start investing in growth business. And plus, you're part of the EU, unlike the UK now, and you have that whole opportunity sitting there on your doorstep. And that was kind of interesting conversation point there as well. And obviously the government here has been helping establish visa programs to bring people into Malta. Just want to talk briefly, I don't want to talk too long today because we're going to open up the panel shortly, but we do work with various different business schools around the world, as you mentioned, and so Boston University and Harvard to a certain extent we work with in the Boston area. So we've just done some recent research with Boston University in Boston in the US, where obviously a lot of the investors may come from the US on a platform like ours for businesses here or from Europe, etc. And there've been lots of impacts of COVID onto the venture community. And I thought it'd be useful to maybe share a few of those insights with the group here. This is from the horse's mouth from VCs themselves. So what's called deal flow, the inbound number of deals that come to venture capital firms, first of all, sort of deflated and then kind of grew enormously during that kind of period. But interesting enough, over the general period of COVID, the number of entrepreneurs seeking funding actually grew as opposed to actually contracting. But some of the venture and some of the angel funding collapsed initially and then regrew again. Now it'll be very interesting to see with the financial markets not doing well, how that impacts. And what we're seeing at the moment globally is very much around some valuations have come off a bit. Sometimes the term sheets, the terms for the entrepreneurs and the venture firms might be a bit tighter than they were before. There's a few sort of storm clouds. It's not like the world switched off like in 2000, but there are some sort of slight changes and dynamics that are going on at the moment. It's useful to know here. So valuations took a hit. Now some businesses went crazy during the dot-com period. You know, the Netflixes of the world, etc., that were very dependent upon those markets. But they've also gone the other way subsequently. Deal closing has been impacted. So when you we're the first part of the process in terms of shortlisting and trying to make contact with the VCs, but then obviously there are many processes you need to go through afterwards. The pitching, you need to go through the negotiations, you need to go through actually kind of closing a deal with a venture capital firm. And that was kind of affected. So the way that people interacted between venture firms and entrepreneurs changed during COVID. So much went online, and we're obviously an online platform, so we benefit from that to a certain extent. But a lot of interviews and meetings between VCs and entrepreneurs happen on Zoom. There's now more of a hybrid. So a remote market like Malta might have found it easier in the pandemic to access venture capital funds, because it doesn't make any difference if you're in Malta or if you're in London doing that Zoom call. But there's a bit of a hybrid going on now between how meetings are occurring. There are different kind of exits. So whenever you get an investor on board, they're always interested in the exit. Are you going to sell your business? If so, how much for and who to? And obviously there was the rise of the SPACs, which kind of come off a bit more recently, which is other kind of forms of listed entities which are funding entrepreneurial businesses without going through the venture market. And some talk obviously about some more social media type businesses. And what happened was that, and this is kind of a hybrid now, but what's important actually, particularly from a market like Malta, if you're going to engage with VCs in Berlin or London, and many VCs have European remits. So most London VCs will still invest across Europe. Most Berlin VCs will invest across Europe, but they may not know about what's out there. So that's why if you get on a platform like us, they might be able to see you and then make contact with you. But there are different kind of dynamics that occurred during this whole period. So one of the problems is how to get across your message as an entrepreneur in a Zoom pitch as opposed to in-person pitch, because people pick up different dynamics. And so the kinesics, the kind of interactions in the startup team, harder to see on a Zoom call than in person. The founder passion, people can come across as a bit crazy if they gesticulate too much on a TV or something. Whereas if you do it in person, it doesn't look so extreme. So there are all kind of things that were occurring to how people viewed pitches and presentations in that period. And there had been an increase in the speed to market, in the sense that because some of the process didn't require meeting in person, deals are being done more quickly. That's now slowed down again. Again, actually, one of the conferences I was in the US the other week, VCs were saying, well, we used to work all hours of the day to try and get deals done because it was so crazy. Now with a slight slowdown, they're now working 9 to 5 more. So they're working, so deals are taking longer to do, literally because the VCs aren't quite as manic as they were. Sorry, there's a bit of it's not very clear on this slide, sorry. But so we talk about some tips for finding your dream investor. And this is a bit like sort of the dream date effect of, you know, what is it that makes VCs tick, and particularly what's going to make them tick for your opportunity. And it's worthwhile getting to know and understand the venture and private equity market and getting on a platform like ours prior to even going in there, because you need to become familiar with what's out there and might be picked up as an opportunity by a venture capital firm even before you might be aware they might be looking for you. So you have to understand what VCs are looking for. So what kind of returns they're looking for, what kind of locations they're looking at, etc. Because certain things count you in, count you out. Now, our system automatically sifts some of that information. You've got to study and note their preferences. So again, like the dating game, so if you're going to actually go and have interaction with VC, don't bother talking to one that is not in your sector or is not in your space in some kind of way. And again, that's something we're trying to help people with the way we grade the matches on the system. Make connections and network. So we're not the only tool. Often what will happen is entrepreneurs in our platform will identify venture potential funders, but also will reach out to them through LinkedIn, through emails. There's a range of techniques that you have to try and use to try to connect with people, and through networking, through events like this. Now, we actually have if anybody's going to be in London on the 12th of July, I don't know if anybody's in town then, we have an event on the 12th of July, and let us know if you'll be there, because we have you can also sign up online as well. We have a very good sort of panel of venture capital firms speaking at an event actually after the other sort of Cambridge report that happened in the UK. And we'd love to book you into the London community in the venture market. So if you're in London on the 12th of July or want to have details about that, we'll share details with you about how to connect online or in person that event. And understand how to overcome bias. So there are issues of quality and valuation, etc. So what we're saying there is that there will automatically be an inbuilt concern about entrepreneurs coming from a market that VCs are less familiar with. So they may expect the valuations of businesses come from a market like this to be slightly lower, because they might have to think they're going to put more effort in some kind of way, or they're not as familiar with the territory. And there's some tips about pitches, and we'll try and send these notes out afterwards as well. But entrepreneurs typically think that, for instance, if a VC investor has invested in a business like theirs, that the VC will be interested in theirs. Well, venture capital firms tend to invest in sectors or stages, so different stages of business or different sectors in certain circumstances. But if they've invested in a business that looks very similar to yours, they're actually less likely to invest in yours, because they can't invest in too many similar businesses. They have often what's called Karetsu, like a number of adjacent businesses they might invest into. So if you see a business in their portfolio, and you can see their portfolios on our platform, we have select portfolio information. When you do your due diligence on the VCs themselves in your shortlist, you can see the kind of business they invest into. So the kind of business is a good indicator, but if it's too close, actually they're less likely. So a lot of anti-intuitives effective in the space. Understand the sectors and stage. Now, again, our system does that to a certain extent for you, but don't talk to people in the fund mid-market businesses if you're trying to do a focused raise, but it's an early stage biotech company or something. Obviously, in your pitches and your decks and other information about the business, you need to try and make sure it looks defensible, scalable. So we often see that entrepreneurs, when we do the concierge service, we tend to see entrepreneurs try to raise too little money. It's one of the key things then to do. And they actually don't realize how much money they need to raise. And going back raising money is such a waste of time. And it's not a waste of time, but it's kind of we try to save people money and time as a process, but you will end up spending a lot of time on that process, even if we save you a lot of time on the shortlisting process. But it's a long process. It can take 6 months to raise funding from start to finish of a process, or 9 months sometimes. But also all the hours spent trying to raise money are spent raising money rather than running a business. So, but often what entrepreneurs do is they therefore underestimate what they need to raise to grow their business, and you don't want to come back to the market too soon. So it's better often to relook at your business model and see, do I need to raise a little bit more money? And so we typically also often see entrepreneurs in markets which aren't the Bay Area. In the Bay Area, everybody wants 10, 20 million bucks to start off with in the first round. But if you're outside those markets, people tend to ask for quite small amounts of money. And in so doing, you often rule out certain venture investors. So if a venture investor invests no less than 2 million euros in the first round they invest into, if you're asking for €500,000, they'll just think you're too early stage and flick you sideways. And say something in the audience there, they're flicking sideways. So they literally flick you sideways. And you may end up in their CRM system and maybe looked at later or something, but you may also get discounted and not be able to get back in again. So again, it's the dating analogy. There's no point dating if you're taken with somebody else, and similarly, if you're kind of not in the right position or the right mode, don't go and seek that kind of funding in that particular time. Understand the venture market, understand your competition within your business that's relevant. Understanding returns is a very interesting one. So everybody tends to hear in the venture capital community, the average return of a venture capital fund is 30%. 30% IRR, 30% internal rate of return. In fact, that's the average. And what a lot of entrepreneurs don't realize, again, in markets which aren't served as much by venture capital, is that what VCs are looking for is a business that's going to have a much, much higher return. 20, 30 times return on their money is typically what they might be looking for. Now, what happens is in a portfolio of business they invest into, even these smart people in venture capital firms make a lot of mistakes, or some things don't work out. So on average, 8 out of 10 investments they make go sideways. They either go nowhere or they go bust. And 1 or 2 out of every 10 tend to work. And that's, they invest in portfolios, understand there's a kind of portfolio game. So the 1 or 2 that work are meant to be like home runs. So when you pitch a venture capital firm, your business has to look like a home run. It can't look like a small, it may be early stage, it may have a long way to go, but you've got to say, here's a market that we want to address, and not just this massive market, but here's the subsection of that market we think we can properly address, as opposed to what the global market might be in some kind of way, and how we're going to get you that return. If the numbers don't add up that way, it's unlike you're less likely that a venture firm is going to back your business. So venture is not for everybody. It's not a bad thing. It just suits some kind of businesses, not other kind of businesses. And we'll see the other funding source here. And also the exit thing, people think it takes a shorter amount of time from research we've done. People think it takes a short amount of time to build a business now. And it's completely opposite. It costs more money to build a business now and takes longer. Because, it may slightly change in terms of the cost of money, because although obviously inflation out there globally at the moment, it might be that salaries for certain roles might come off a bit as big tech companies fire people, that kind of thing. There might be more staff available and salaries might come down, ironic enough, in space like tech. But we were at an event in April in Boston, and Monica, who works with me here, was an event in Boston in April, and the VC who was quoted there, Caleb Winder, actually, who's talked about $9.95 a no-brainer. He's a biotech VC. And he said he's now advising entrepreneurs to raise more money, not less money, even if valuations have come down a bit. And the reason he's doing that is because things are costing more to do. I mean, we had you get emails from lawyers and accounting firms saying our fees have only gone up 7% because that's the CPI. And all of a sudden, inflation's everywhere. So the cost of the simple things like servers and accounting fees and legal fees and all this kind of stuff has suddenly risen when it was very stable for a long time. So, and these are all costs of doing business. So in some ways, entrepreneurs may need to raise more money, but you're always looking for an exit, a sale, which may be 5 to 7 years out. So you have to try and understand where you'll be and where the market will be at that kind of point. It's obviously difficult to forecast. So I'm going to stop a minute to open up for the panel. I have to rearrange where the table is and stuff. But if you go to Qodeo.com, that's how it's like rodeo, but with a Q. People always ask me where we came up with the name. We sort of made up the name a long time ago. It's a whole process. But basically, it's Qodeo.com. And one of the very useful resources there, as well as obviously the platform itself and signing up for the platform, is our blog. And there's quite a lot of interesting articles there about access to capital, there's a video from a Women in Venture seminar, which actually Monica put together recently. I think Anna Maria was on that one, Anna Maria. So we had a bunch of European female entrepreneurs and female venture capitalists. We had a venture capitalist from Florida. We had a venture capitalist from Switzerland and somewhere else. On this conversation about how women find it easier or less easy to access capital in the current markets and what the issues are. So there are quite a lot of interesting dynamics there. So that video's on there. There's videos from other events we've done. This video we posted there. And there's a lot of insight about how to, just short articles about how to try to get into VC. Now, I mentioned we're only $9.95 in the sales pitch here, but it's $9.95 or $19.95 for the concierge product, or $99.95, €100 for a year, but you get 50% off with Wow Qodeo. It's probably hard to read that, but we'll send out an email afterwards to remind everybody. But that's for entrepreneurs who wish to get on the platform, is using that discount coupon, you get 50% off. Well, that's a bit from us about what we do and a few sort of tips and insights we're seeing in the market at the moment. What we'd really like to do now, if that's okay, is move to the panel. We've got this great panel. Maybe what I'll do is once I pull this thing back, we'll get the panelists pull their chairs forward slightly, and we'll, just without tripping on the wires, there's cables everywhere here today, so just be careful. Thank you. And we'll let them all introduce each other, introduce themselves, and then we've got some sort of key thoughts. We had a couple of pre-calls where we prepared for this, where we discussed some trends and issues about Malta itself and how it interacts into this space. And then we'd like to open it up to you folks here in the audience, and then also some people online, and then we'll have some networking drinks, etc. Before I forget, sorry, Monica reminded me there by tapping, was that everybody hopefully gave a business card in when they came today. Monica's going to do a draw at the end of the discussion, so before we go to networking drinks, and we'll put out a couple of cards, a first winner, a second winner. The first winner gets a bottle of scotch, because we're from the UK. If you like scotch, or you can give it away to somebody. Just don't drive off afterwards. And then we've got a box of chocolates for the second place. And each of the first and the second winners get free access to Qodeo for a year. Also with it, and we'll send you the details about how to log in for that subsequently. So make sure you've given her your card if you haven't already. She's in the back there. Any
investments?
investments?
You are not going to make direct investments as well.
We don't do direct investments. So Qodeo is a
I'm
platform. So we help direct people in the right kind of way. But we've actually had recommendations that we become a fund, but we haven't actually gone that far yet. There's only so much you can do in a day. I mean, it's interesting, but I understand the dynamics in different markets. There are lots of opportunities to create a fund. People have suggested that to us, but that's another conversation for another day. So it was fantastic to see such a large audience here today, and I want to thank the panel for having shared everything. Share this with all your friends, share the site, etc., and share the discount coupon and everything else we send you in the future. I'm going to pull this back, hopefully without making too much noise, and I'll open up the panel. Perhaps if Anna Maria wants to start off by introducing yourself while I do this, and tell everybody here your story and how come you're here today.
I'll try to be short because we have really a very nice panel here, and we would very much like to really see your thoughts about the current situation also of the Maltese market and how we can ultimately really plug in better into the European and the international markets. And this is something that I very much care about because whilst I know a number of you, for the ones I don't know, I have been working for the last 20 years supporting SMEs, supporting startups and SMEs. I've been doing this initially in Romania, my original home country, and then for the last 18 years in Malta, my adoptive home country. And one of the biggest challenges I have always found is that in the process of working with SMEs and with startups and so on, when I have been supporting them in accessing funding, and often I have been working with them in the phase of access to grants, public grants, EU grants, and so on, at one point they grow much bigger than what the grants are supporting, and we have to start looking for business angels, for venture capital, for loans, and so on and so forth. And you realize that you really need the whole spectrum of financing along the life cycle of a company, or sometimes in the same period, a mix, because it creates a virtuous circle of encouragement from one funding provider to another. And this I always found to be actually a challenge. And this is when a few years ago, I actually, met Simon and Qodeo, and I said, wow, this is really important. Something that allows us to really sort of do short listing of that potential out there, because we all know that there are lots of business angels, there are lots of investors, there are lots of entrepreneurs, but how do you match the real ones? And there is so much time that is taken by, preparing pitches for different investors, and pitching to the right ones is really important, and pitching to the wrong doors is to be avoided. But how do we do that? How do we know what we can find in our home market, and where and how can we go to international markets that we don't know? How can we get maybe not a warm introduction, but at least some sort of, curated introduction? So this is my perspective and the area from where I'm coming, and my interest in this, ecosystem. I'm very much in the middle of it. I'm an intermediary, let's call it like that. So I'm the consultant that works with both parties, and I would definitely like to see smoother processes of matching and of finding investment and of making investments. And the better we do it and the faster we do it, the better for all of us.
So maybe over to Philip now, your background.
Sure. So quick background. So my name is Philip. I was born and raised over here, went to school over here, and then kind of headed out about 20 odd years ago. I worked in tech. My background was in tech for as long as I remember. And about 12 years ago, so I started a company in New York called Smart Asset. And the way I like to say, we got very fortunate. We struggled a lot to raise money. We struggled to find product market fit for many, many years. But somehow things came together, and we managed to build a company that about a year ago was valued at just over $1 billion. But we went through the whole process of raising from angels, raising from VCs, a potential number of sales that didn't work out. We did Y Combinator in 2012 as well. So I think I've got a bit of the US perspective more than I do, honestly, the European or the Maltese perspective. But being Maltese, part of my passion is trying to help and support or connect with startups over here. I always get very frustrated that whenever I go to a Y Combinator event, they always keep saying, "Oh, you're the one holding the Maltese flag." And I think after 10 years, it's about time like some other Maltese company came along. So that's my thing. Like, I think I got very fortunate with one startup, but I'd love to see how I can help other Maltese companies, Maltese entrepreneurs, or people based over here to succeed. Stanley?
Right. I'm coming from Mcdougall, which is a government agency, primarily, apart from other initiatives which we have been known for lately, being COVID-related measures. We have always acted as an advisor and a policy initiator to government on various sources, primarily through our interest in government-owned companies, but more than that. One of them was precisely access to finance, especially for SMEs and startups, also because it was a frequent recurrence that we had as a country-specific recommendations saying this access to finance in Malta is a huge problem. And that is where our interest in the matter started. And we provided a number of ideas and policy initiatives, at least for consideration by government. Some of them related to visas. Mention was made of the startup visa, including the nomad visa. Other initiatives which we suggested were the availability of enhanced incubators. And I know Malta, the president, took on that idea and took it forward. So these roles, so to speak, of providing ideas, policy initiatives to government, targeting access to finance and startups in particular.
So basically, I'm Anthony from Malta Enterprise. Malta Enterprise is the economic development agency for Malta. So we're we're a government agency, and our role is to help whoever is already established in Malta, but also to bring in talents to Malta, to bring in startups and companies to relocate or co-locate in Malta. I must say that like 2 years ago, we realized that in truth, many of the companies that we were managing to attract were indeed startups that were already hitting some points of success in their home country, but were looking at an alternative location, either for co-location to access different markets, or because they had a particular R&D project that they wanted to continue develop. And we were being quite successful in different areas, from medtech to digital games, to technology, to DLT also at the time. And we said, it feels like we really need to focus on this particular area of focus. Fortunately, I started to look at this sector also through Stanley. We had a collaboration in the past, and I started to fall in love with entrepreneurship, while not being an entrepreneur myself. And we started to realize that there were things that we could do. One of them was to have a house where anyone who is after information about startups can start off from. So that's exactly what we started to do by the creation of the Start in Malta brand, with a portal that came along with it. But we really wanted for not to end up with just a portal, because a website, anyone can do a website. What we wanted to do is to take that opportunity and showcase the government support that is already available. We have improved it, looking to up to 1 million euros in a mix of grants or repayable advances. So a proper offering to startups, to clearly say that we are here both for the indigenous startups, the Maltese talent growing up, but also to bring in new companies to Malta, and to start directly targeting the issues that we are discussing today. So the elements of being incubated properly or accelerated, the elements of access to finance, the concept of having people on the ground willing to invest in you and not only looking outside of Malta for investment. And we started to try and address these issues with a number of methods. We created an event which is Startup Festival. We will have it again this year in October 13th, 14th. So write it in your diaries. But also by bringing to Malta concepts like Plug and Play, which is an international, very reputable accelerator, to start off this change in sophistication of the preparation that is available. we are also supporting a number of non-government activities and supporters when it comes to J, when it comes to the Creative Cup, when it comes to Pichora. These are all events, activities that are happening in Malta that we are proud of, and we as government want to support also financially with our sponsorship. But also looking at the future, we supported the first iteration of Shark Tank Malta, which was maybe, and we have successfully funded projects with us today. The point wasn't to offer the silver bullet, right? But to offer an opportunity to mainstream the concept of entrepreneurship, to showcase that there are startups in Malta that are really needing of investment, that are creating value on the ground, and that we shouldn't shy away on looking at the risk opportunity, yes, because you need to look at that, but really support our startups. And we look forward to continue doing that with an injection also of business angels, and why not going for the big boys with VCs, but in the proper way.
Okay, great. And last but not least, Abigail.
Hello, I'm Abigail Malmo. I am CEO of the Chamber of SMEs. As the name implies, we are a business organization. We are a social partner to the government, and we stand between the government and the businesses. When I say we represent SMEs, we do represent SMEs, but we also focus specifically on small, micro, self-employed startups. Okay, so our area of expertise is the small businesses, those employing less than 10 many times. And the way we see the support that we give and the services we give is that we are partners to businesses, but not partners commercially. We are there to support them, to extend the support structure that they have. We are a reference point. We give them a voice with government structures about the issues they are facing, about the needs to improve the business environment that they operate in. But apart from that, apart from our main aim of existence of representing businesses, we also provide a number of support services which are complementary to that. So we know that Maltese businesses are very entrepreneurial. They're constantly looking for opportunities, and they also look at us for opportunities. So we give them full visibility of what is available to them apart from networking opportunities to create partnerships and synergies. We also give them visibility of funding opportunities, whether it is EU funds, whether it is dealing with banking financing, and whether it is alternatives to banking, which we are here to discuss today. I am very sorry to tell you that I will need to leave at 4:30 today because I have another engagement. Very sorry about that. So I try to be a bit
lucky
quick.
to have you today. So can I ask thank you. So can I ask the panel, I mean, the number of, I've got my phone out not to look at emails, actually to look at my notes here. So we had a prep call and a couple of prep calls talking about issues and about issues might affect folks here. Can I ask first of all about culture? So a lot of questions come about culture and expertise and expectations, I suppose. Perhaps if I could, I mean, ask maybe Anthony first of all, what your thoughts are there, and then maybe go around the panel.
Maybe you want to clarify that a bit more. So,
well,
when it comes to culture?
So when we had this prep call, we talked about issues of issues of concerns about failure, what that means about entrepreneurial culture here, about the fact that people are very entrepreneurial historically here, but aren't used to other sources of finance or giving away equity stakes, those kind of issues.
So basically, I think that you nailed it. The fact that we are entrepreneurial, I think it's clearly part of the Maltese spirit. Some people work full-times, part-times, extra jobs. They also are trying to start a startup at the same time. And we've seen it also during COVID. We were seeing the statistics of how things changed during COVID. COVID in Malta was also an opportunity for people to focus on that hobby, their passion that they had, and to really try and find time to now dedicate to it, to grow it a bit further and take it further down the line. We also, as Malta Enterprise Business First, experienced an increase in applications for not just the highly innovative startups, but also individuals starting off a business. So the entrepreneurial culture is for sure there. And there's a want to create value for oneself, to create profit, to have an income, a new income, if needs be. However, as you were saying, the fear of failure is another intrinsic element within our culture. And a very good observation is because we're smaller, so everybody would know each other, supposedly, and a failure might be even more public because of that. I believe that, not just to repeat myself, but efforts in showcasing failure and success and normalizing it, like what we try to do also with Shark Tank, is a step in the right direction. However, there needs to be much more of a support when it comes from an official point of view, when it comes to bankruptcy laws, when it comes to supporting a restart of someone who has a failure. However, that does not make the individual an actual failure. It means that that particular entity at that particular moment in time was not successful. And we try and do all we can, not all we can, because we always need to improve, as Malta Enterprise, not just to just dish out funds, but to be there in the routes towards the different time frames and targets that a company has. And we try and do that with understanding the challenges and trying to fix them. We're also approaching it from a bit of an overarching approach now, with the pushing of a startup framework, which will bring together changes in laws which are already law of the land, but also creating new points, addressing pain points, like what we're saying, bankruptcy, like trying to bring in talent from third countries as well when it comes to startup founders. Obviously, these are my thoughts. It's not the full answer for sure.
What about Abigail? You've got some thoughts there.
Yes. So first off, in order to explain a bit the mentality and the culture of businesses in Malta, the first thing is that when it comes to equity financing, it's still a relatively new topic, even though we have been discussing it and mentioning venture capital and equity financing for many years, it has not picked up sufficiently in Malta. And basically, when we ask our members on where they look for finances when they're looking to invest or expand their business, firstly, they look at private funds. That is their first preference. Secondly, at banking facilities. Thirdly, at EU financing, overdrafts, and then there is other private investors. So I think there is a lot of opportunity, but also there is a learning curve that we need to appreciate and understand. And I'm really glad to learn that there is this platform that can make this possibly an easy reality to tap into. And you mentioned a lot, Simon, about relationships, okay, and dating. And in fact, that is very much where our members come from. When they say what those that know about the concept and say that they don't utilize or haven't looked into it, the things that they mention is trust. First and foremost, how will they trust the partner that they will be teaming up with? Obviously, they are very choosy who to do business with, but even more so who to open up their business, their dream, their lifetime's investment, and let someone in and give part ownership of. So the trust element is very, very important. It's key. They also, with this trust issue comes control, okay? So they are used to being the starters of their business, those that gave life to the idea, but now we're talking about them giving part of the control to someone else and losing a bit that part of control. So maybe it would be interesting to see even how this platform can help them in making a match and understanding what the appetite from both sides is. And I do think that they would also stand to gain out of some professional competence in refining the way they present themselves and in refining what they would be asking for their business. Because sometimes we are so keen in getting something for our business that we undersell the business or we don't present it properly. So I think that even when we look at the financing environment in Malta, we do believe that banking is still very prominent And possibly this provides opportunity for alternatives, because when we check with our members how easy it is to tap into bank financing, it is not that easy. Relationships with the banks, I think, have never been so difficult, unfortunately. Something that we are working on separately, but it's a very difficult thing to sort out in a very short time frame. So this difficulty possibly might provide a faster route, like COVID did with digitalization. It might provide a faster route towards private financing. At the end of the day, we always encourage our members to knock on doors, to shop around. And this is one aspect where they can shop around. They don't need to actually take the offer on or go in for the opportunity, but at least they know what is available for them out there, and they can be able to compare between the offers they have in front of them.
Thank you. That's very interesting. So I'm not trying to leapfrog over Stanley here, but when I asked Philip here, the related question, and so you obviously left Malta to build your success. And one of the problems often is not just the education piece, but in actually growing business, but obviously there wasn't the opportunity to build here in the way you could build in the US, but possibly. And what's your kind of feeling in terms of having to leave a very talented sort of, yet sort of small place to kind of build your future? Because obviously what we'd like to try and see is increasingly businesses retaining some of the talent or some of the intellectual property, at least in Malta. And then even if the sales are elsewhere, et cetera, as a sort of future model.
Sure. So I guess the reason I left Malta was not to start the company. I left Malta for different reasons, and this was like right after university. So I think I'd been to New York once, fell in love with it, and said I just want to go there at all costs. And actually worked there for 10 years before I even started my own company. But touching a bit about the culture over here, because you mentioned things about control, equity. And again, I'll preface this by saying, like, my background is with startups or companies that do intend to scale or raise certain amounts of money. So maybe not just remaining a small enterprise, but becoming something much larger. And I do agree, like speaking to investors over here, that some folks who invest either want to take quite a bit of control in startups. And one thing I see from especially investors in the US is an investor usually like wants to invest in you, trust you, but doesn't want to run the company. In fact, if you give them an update once every quarter, that's all there is. Maybe asking them for advice very rarely, but they have tons of other investments they're dealing with, so they don't want to take control at all. And there's always this, the famous quotes: would you rather own 100% of $1 million company or 5% of $1 billion company? So yes, at the end of the day, giving up equity is part of the game. It's, to be honest, like, it never really crossed my mind. I mean, probably by our series, our third round, we had already lost majority control of the company. But investors want you to run the company. Like, they're just trying to enable you. They're not trying to take over by any means, unless you do something egregious. In that case, sure. So yeah, I think this idea that if you're trying to build something really big and scalable, and you want external funding, you just need to be open to, yes, giving up equity and maybe losing control, but really the investors are trusting you to build that company.
So we've seen that a bit in smaller ecosystems, smaller markets, that VCs tend to take larger equity stakes than in bigger markets because there's less competition in various ways. So one of the things we can try and help people with here is actually looking very broadly at where the investors might be. And they may be in the US, they may be in Europe somewhere. And actually, if you get to see a larger pool of potential investors, you're more likely to have almost competition between them to invest, and you can choose more easily. Whereas in a more restricted market, a smaller location, it's very hard to sort of go outside the one or two people who might come in to offer you that funding. And one of the things that we obviously need to work on is, and we're trying to help out in the blog, for instance, is more education. And we're going to be doing much more about that to try and help people, because one of the access to capital issues is before you even think about venture capital, you even know about it and where it sits in the funding process, and how that might help you. So we're going to do more on that. Can I ask about the issue of different forms of finance? Perhaps Anna Maria, so you were talking about before that, it's not venture capital funding or EU funding or debt funding. It might be a mix. Has that become more familiar to entrepreneurs here?
I think it is becoming more familiar, but there is still room for a lot of further I wouldn't want to call it education, awareness of it. And Anthony was just mentioning earlier about one of the schemes that Malta Enterprise has, in which public funding in a grant form goes hand in hand, pari passu, meaning in the same amount, with other private equity that you would be raising, be it crowdfunding, be it business angel, be it venture capital, and so on. And this you start seeing happening more and more at EU level. There is, for example, the European Innovation Council Accelerator that has, for the last 3, 4, 5 years now, 3 years, has started to go for blended finance. So it's actually matching grant funding. Typically, it would be like, let's say 25% of the whole pool, plus another 3/4 of equity funding. And we are talking here about even up to 20 million in total. So even when you said earlier, you have to be able to see longer term and see your needs of financing longer term and into the bigger picture and have the right mix there. But when I work with entrepreneurs, often they do undersell themselves. They do underestimate their own needs. They would say, oh, but I don't need those amounts. I only need 100,000, 200,000. Well, maybe you need it now, but you don't go through all the effort of applying for funding, public funding, private equity, and so on, just for the next 6 months. You have to see it for the next 2, 3 years. So there is a need for a lot of awareness, I would say, not just education, or not go into that kind of wording, in terms of how to approach this, how you need to really sort of look long term. Sometimes even the entrepreneurs will say, but we are entrepreneurs, we don't even need a business plan, we don't need this. Well, no one is saying that you need to have everything written down and everything has to be sort of stuck to for the next 3 years. But if you don't know where you are going and you are not able to tell someone else, why are they going to trust you to give you the money, be it public, be it private? So these elements have to somehow come into play. And that also links into culture and the fear of sharing information. And sometimes it's not even like, I can see this in public funding and grants where there isn't additional control coming from, in terms of the control over the company. There is this constant fear of sharing information about the company. While certain elements are definitely your intellectual property or the intellectual property of an entrepreneur and should not be disclosed, a lot of others, you can share them. You have the idea, but don't think, or when I'm saying don't think, I'm not referring necessarily to you. An entrepreneur should not think that they are the only ones that ever came up with that idea or that they can implement it. Sometimes you need to have that help from someone else. You need to be able to sort of, for example, share a slice in a cake with others that can help you really grow it, then just enjoy a little piece and it will never grow. So these are elements of culture that have to be somehow adjusted.
Yeah, we had a very interesting circumstance. One of our early subscribers was from Malta, running a mid-market company. And he actually asked us, it was interesting, we didn't have this in our functionality at the time, whether he could not disclose to other people in Malta that he was raising money. Because the natural thing is you look locally for the money first and then elsewhere. I remember being actually in Mumbai once with a venture capital firm on the platform, and they said to me about our own business, have you raised money from your own location where you come from? So that's a curious question. Why do you ask that? So because people in your own location know who you are. And that's that sort of trust thing. Have you built trust locally? Why would you not be raising money locally? But sometimes it's hard to raise money on it locally. But this Maltese entrepreneur, this mid-market company, didn't want anybody in Malta to know that he was raising money for his business because he thought it'd be out there in the community. So it is interesting in these sort of smaller internet workplaces how it happens. Perhaps if I ask Stanley, bring Stanley, then open up to questions. I know that Monica sent me a WhatsApp message just saying, if anybody online, by the way, is trying to ask questions, if they could actually channel them to her at team@qodeo.com. So team, as in team @qodeo.com, and she can try and marshal some of those questions shortly. But can I ask Stanley perhaps about a sector question briefly before we open up to the audience? So what kind of sectors do you see here as being preeminent? Because often you see certain clusters emerging for various reasons. I worked in Cambridge in the UK in the VC sector. Obviously, biotech, high tech, became sort of clusters around the university of natural. But then you also have random entrepreneurship, but there's a lot of breadth of the entrepreneurship in Malta, isn't there? There's aerospace, there's fisheries, there's light engineering, there's now tech, blockchain. What are you seeing coming
Well,
through?
all of those sectors are or should be ripe for further development. But I would also look, and I honestly believe that as a country, we should look as well at established sectors already, whether it's within manufacturing in particular, because there can be areas where, given the right attention and room for development, we could assist established sectors, some of them which could be ripe for movement out of Malta to establish deeper roots. So traditional manufacturing comes to mind, which we can improve there. But there again, we need to support with assistance for innovation, assistance for further development, particularly, however, innovation is key. We lack, in my opinion, specific attention and funding for innovation, and we should invest more in that. That is an area which, if well developed, well supported, it can assist our traditional sectors to go to the next level, really, establish deeper roots, even financial service, for example. We talk a lot about financial services. Yes, we do have a thriving sector, but it is, in a way, limited to, I would dare say, back office oriented work. There is no innovation there which we can help establish deeper markets. Say, look at insurance. Okay, we have an established insurance market, an overseas insurance market, captive and the like, but is it that deep? Do we have an insurance market there? Do we have the capacity for innovating within that sector? If we do that, we can have additional growth opportunities within these sectors. And I believe we should look at those more. Obviously, not at the expense of new sectors, whether it's aerospace, aircraft, and the like. But definitely the local, the well-established already, we should nurture more.
And so obviously venture capital firms historically were created to fund innovation. And there's a whole history about how the venture capital industry came together in California originally, sort of funding around aerospace and defense originally. So there's lots of opportunity for funding of innovation from venture, and it is going back to what Philip was saying, which is that in many cases you may have to give a little bit of an equity stake up, but it's interesting you're saying in the US that you think VCs are often less involved to run their business or helping in various ways, but in Europe you get this kind of midway process. We're partly based in the US, and I came back to London the other week and had some conversations with some VCs last week, and it was fascinating. They were kind of sitting halfway between the UK and the US. They were investing small amounts for later staged opportunities and perhaps trying to get more involved than US VCs might have. So again, that relates to the kind of stage or sector of assistance you might see here or might need to access here. Can I just ask if Monica has the mic, I think the walk around mic, if it's possible, because I'm mindful of time because we have drinks and networking. So if we have a few questions from the audience perhaps, and if you say what your name is and what organization you come from, and perhaps whether you're an entrepreneur or an investor, whatever you might be. Now, investors tend to get very scared if they announce they're an investor and people run away. But hopefully you can say what you do and kind of what the question is. Potentially also if you wanted to point it towards one member of the panel in particular. And not poor Abigail has to go soon. So we've got any questions for Abigail first. That might be nice. But anybody got any questions at all? So hands up at all. Any questions? Can't be that shy. I don't know. Oh, there's one here. So now it's started. So say who you are and where you're from.
Hi, I'm Teresa Bagelli. I'm from Malta Pastizzi. I was just on Shark Tank Malta and I got an investor. So my idea is actually to have a mobile food truck with Maltese food in Canada. So okay. Yeah. Anyways, my question is, are you channeling international investors? Is it international? Where like
right? So a question to us.
Where do you get your investors?
I was keen to have questions to the panel as well, so they're here too. But so we have about 6,500 plus VC and PE firms tracked in one way or another platform, and they're very global. And so a lot of what we have a lot in Asia. We started off actually Asia Pacific as a business, even though a British company originally, and then became strong in Europe, and now the US increasingly, and Canada as well. We have Canadian VCs on the platform. So what's important is that when the grading occurs on the platform, it depends how much of a factor it is, but some venture or private equity firms simply won't invest outside certain geographies. So when they raise money, I used to raise money for VCs, and you have these documents to the VCs themselves have to raise their money from what's called limited partners, pension funds, etc. And they have to say where they're going to deploy that money, both in terms of sectors and stages, and also where geographically. So it might be if there's a Canadian investor who's happy to invest in Europe, then a business of the right attributes might be applicable to them, whereas it might be another Canadian investor not allowed to invest outside Canada from their remit with their investors. So there's a very global market. Sometimes people go outside the norm of it. Sometimes people go outside the box. So there can be some, we're talking about before, sort of fuzzy matches in our system where we see there's a number of attributes that really look very good, but it's not a perfect match effectively. And it can be worth trying to see if an investor might somehow bend a remit, but where they have very specific funds from very specific pension funds, those types of groups, they tend to be more restricted. Some VCs are more funded by family offices and more private individuals themselves putting money into the VCs, and they can be more flexible sometimes, or might reflect interests or diasporas of various sorts. So, do you have a question? Any other questions for the panel or anybody else at all?
Hi, so I'm Jennifer Mcdougall. I'm the co-founder of Imagination Spectrum from Canada. And my question, I'd love to hear the perspectives of most or all folks on the panel. And it's around where are the general flows of money from the investment community going to? What types of companies do you see as getting funded, and how has that flow changed from, pre-pandemic days to post-pandemic days?
I might say something very quickly before the panelists come in, which is that there have been changes with the current financial markets. And what we're seeing is that valuations are coming down a bit, but it's not affecting earlier stage businesses that much yet. But there are obviously, I mean, the ways that funds are deployed and the amounts of money going to different industries depends a lot on the location. So you see numbers being skewed by a very large private equity transaction being done in a particular location for something, for a particular industry, that might skew the numbers. So venture is very focused on earlier stage, and it's still biotech and SaaS. And there's obviously, you get a lot of trends and fads. And when I was in venture capital, we had to try and avoid fads, there's something, whatever the latest thing is, because you've got to exit the business in 5 to 7 years time. So just because something's a fad now, it does not mean it's going to be a fad in 5 to 7 years time.
Can you be a fad specialist?
A fad specialist. Yeah, I'm always a bit cynical on fads. I probably miss out on opportunities when they come along. But does anybody in the panel want to answer the question to Philip? You've got a lot of experience in North America.
Well, so there's definitely been a bit of a difference. So until probably 10, 12 months ago, when you're raising funds, like normally, especially early stage, you try to get a lead or an anchor, somebody to actually, especially if you're doing like an angel or pre-seed rounds, which now actually have, today I was talking to somebody like how pre-seed rounds have kind of disappeared. But when you're doing an angel round, you'd want one big lead or one big angel, and then lots of other people who maybe you wouldn't even know just come in and put money. That's kind of taken a big hit, because that normally meant those investors would have other investments that they could liquidate and move into startups. Right now, a lot of people are just holding on to those investments because they've just lost value. So there's definitely been a bit of, I think, a significant shift in the way early stage, pre-seed, seed stage investments are done. Having said that, returns are still pretty low in other industries, so startups are still a good investment. Well, are still attractive, but they're high risk. It just means that the amount of capital available, liquidity available to startups, I think, has shrunk quite significantly.
Anthony, or sorry, Anna Maria, sorry.
I would say from a sectorial perspective, the pandemic definitely drew a lot of attention on digital health, big time. And probably this trend is going to continue. It was anyway starting that way, but it really gave it a big push. And there are a few other areas that will continue to be supported, although we see now, for example, in terms of valuations on stock markets and so on, and obviously this spills over into valuation of non-listed companies for tech and so on. The digital environment is going to continue to be the future. So it's going to attract a lot of funding and will continue to have that. Same will be for green technologies. Anything that is going to really support us in, in issues of sustainability, in issues of water management, pollution management, food circularity, urban mobility, and so on. So these are longer term areas of interest that get a lot of attention, both from private investors, but also from the public sector. I mean, I can see at a European funding level, there is clearly a focus on strategic technologies that allow autonomy for Europe and reduction of dependency of various forms and shapes, and also health and green.
Anybody else on the panel?
I don't believe I have the capacity to answer
Okay.
that. But obviously
Right.
there's growth also in the digital games market. Obviously that sector has been growing also during the pandemic, and anything that is related to what we've experienced through COVID, the AR VR space is obviously a space which is growing, complementing the remote element as well.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing, what we're seeing is that it's interesting what Philip's saying, is not seeing quite the same. You know, in markets like the UK, the EIS market, which is a tax break people get to invest early stage businesses, tends to promote them into that. And obviously they have to get profits to deduct those tax deductions from, but that's actually remained pretty active. So it kind of varies a bit. I mean, the other day, if you even in areas like, you know, the listed companies in tech, for instance, have had such a bashing recently, like, you know, like Netflix, for instance, clearly they've created a paradigm which is going to be here for a long time. So the question is there going to be consolidation? What's going to happen to those kind of industries? But we're not in the same era, I don't think. I worked in VC in 2000, not the same era as that. It literally switched off. And technology was so new then. I was involved in a business that was looking to try and raise, or looking at a business that was trying to raise money. It was a little bit like Netflix. There was somebody who founded a company that actually had hotel video on demand. They were trying to do something quite similar to what Netflix was doing. And the UK at the time, they couldn't get up and running because British Telecom, the telecoms company, didn't have broadband properly rolled out in those days. Now it's a given. So now if you want to provide something digitally, it's just the infrastructure's there. So I think we moved on in a kind of quantum kind of way. Investors who are smart realize it's going to exit in 5-7 years' time. These trends are going to continue and accelerate. So there's another question here.
Yes, Maria Camilleri, President of Business and Professional Women here in Malta. My background is finance. I lived in the US for 30 years, and I was heavily involved in M&A and VC and private equity. We talked significantly over here, and I'm still surprised by this, that there is a serious lack of awareness about the funding opportunities for startups and also small businesses. Are there any programs that are being developed right now to create awareness about these opportunities? There's an amalgamation of opportunities out there that very few people are aware of.
If I can answer, obviously, we are doing what we believe is our best shot, but obviously our best shot is not enough. So partially it's useless to fix the incentives if you do not put them out there. And that's what we're trying to do with the Start in Malta Festival, the portal, collaborating with an opportunity like Shark Tank, which obviously is not the end all and be all. It's an opportunity for mainstreaming. And we're also trying to be out there in different events, both locally and also internationally. But yes, sometimes our own incentives seem a bit complicated sometimes. And even the way that we communicate them needs to improve. And we're looking at improving them as we go along. But the answer is no, we're not doing enough, but we are trying to do even more.
And having said that, if I may interrupt as well, it is not just the so-called government entities that have to do that. Even the private participants out there who are themselves offering funding or intent on investing, they should do also their part in finding out, scouting. There's very much often a sense of reliance that this kind of dissemination of information has to come only from the official regulatory government channels. It should be there, yes, and as Zentim was saying, all of us can do more to improve on that. But if there's something crucial in this part, is that there's a private participant, a private initiative. And where is the private participant in his role of scouting, disseminating information of what they are after? That is also crucial. At the end of the day, it's a balance. It's a whole ecosystem blended around the word ecosystem, but it has to function as well.
But it's true about the ecosystem. I think we're onto something here. And I see many faces here that have been working for years on end to get us to this stage. With Jay, with the incubators, with the university incubators, our life sciences park at university as well. There's people who have been working for such a long time at the Malta Digital Innovation Agency. And now we're together creating this. We're here today. We're attracting also companies like yourselves that see this opportunity. There's a bubbling of it. And let's look at the positive sides, because we are onto something. And maybe if I can ask something in general, I have this conundrum. Should we go for the business angels route before we go for the VC route as to what is the next step of our development of our ecosystem? Should one exclude the other? And maybe if some of our panelists or...
Actually, I wanted to add, sorry.
Please go ahead.
So regarding funding over here, I think there's also a bit of a mixing gap between, like, if someone came to me and told me, hey, I want to invest in a hotel, I don't understand hotels. Like, I'm not the right person for that. But then vice versa, when someone's doing a startup, especially maybe a tech startup or something that has a certain profile, growth trajectory, whatever, going to a hotel investor is probably not the right person because their understanding of investments, risks, etc., is off. And I think that's what we're missing a bit over here in Malta, that the people who tend to have the funding, the funds to invest, aren't experienced in investing in startups that are, yes, very high risk. I mean, 9 out of 10, 9.5 out of 10 will fail. But then the potential growth returns are massive. They're not property related. They're completely different. And just getting that into the ecosystem, or at least into maybe being able to communicate that to potential investors, might make it easier for startups to be able to raise funds.
It's sort of a push and pull, demand and supply type of thing. Because in the UK, I know 20 years ago, there was very little appetite by investors to invest in technology, for instance, in general, and it's completely changed. It's changed because of policies, but it's also changed because of a volume thing. So there was a whole bubbling up of entrepreneurial businesses that were seeking some kind of funding. So people came in to solve the funding supply. I think it's important. Can I just ask, is there one more question from the floor? We're running, just keeping an eye on the time here. But then there's meant to be some networking to food and drink coming shortly. I'm not sure if Monica is, I think maybe replacing the mic or somebody. Thank you very much. Oops, thank you, Monica. It's Monica from our team. So who's come over here to join the event as well. So let's have maybe, sorry to cut people short, but maybe one more question. And are there any questions online at all coming through? Or okay, so we'll just maybe we've got time for 2 more questions, but then we do want to kind of try and do the give people the food and drink that is available. So I don't know if that's there might be questions here for the first question, so we should be okay. So are we okay with food and drink coming shortly? Yeah, more, sorry? I think we do have some alcohol as well. I'm not sure we have nice Maltese red, but we have some red and white, I think, or something. I'm not quite sure what we've got, but we'll have some refreshments shortly. Perhaps Francine in the front, and then maybe 2 more questions if we don't have them online, and then we'll wrap for networking.
Thank you. Thank you, Simon. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Fran. Actually got it correct, Francina. Usually people don't get it right, so Fran for short. I'm a headhunter and I've got a startup here in Malta. Thank you very much for organizing this. What I wanted to say is on 2 points specifically. So with regards to access to information, I think that's absolutely crucial. And Mariella, if I remember your name correctly, I think really hit the nail on the head. And but also Stanley is right that there are both parties to each transaction. But I would love to see a lot more layman's language, especially when it comes to access to funding through Malta Enterprise, for example, because most of it is written for accountants or lawyers. Most entrepreneurs are neither, and it's very unlikely that they have the funds to engage an accountant and a lawyer initially to advise them through that. They want to have an understanding of it that they can sort of run through their thought process independently, because the minute you start going to an accountant and a lawyer, it's easily 150 euros an hour plus VAT easily, and that adds up. So that holds back a lot of entrepreneurs. I think the platform is fantastic because it does give an opportunity to entrepreneurs to access different types of funding, because banking is not particularly friendly at the moment across the board, whether it's access to finance or simple things such as opening a bank account. but I was wanting to understand a little bit more about the encouragement of development of startups. And what do I mean by that in Malta is, so let's assume one gets the finance, they set up and everything. But what incentives are there from a financial perspective for entrepreneurs? So if we look at tax incentives, for example, not just grants, because I could not find any. I could be wrong, but.
Over to you guys.
The very quick answer is, this is exactly why we created startandmalta.com, which clearly states in layman's terms for who the particular incentive is directed at, with clearly like 200,000 euros written spelled down directly, because we know it's true. When it comes to tax incentives, there's an incentive called Invest, which is the traditional tax credits, but also changed a bit. It's called Invest. It's available on our website. And through the startup framework that we're currently working on, we will look at improving taxation realities for investors as well, and for the wider ecosystem pertaining to startups.
If I may add to what Anthony is saying, perhaps we should also look at things from a wider perspective. Funding is crucial, but should not be the start and the end of it. The way to address that particular issue that an entrepreneur would face would be also, and this is a support which government should potentially consider, is, or maybe it already does and can be enhanced via either the incubator or via takeoff and what have you, of having individuals who are armed and knowledgeable about what it needs to be done, what incentives are there, who entrepreneurs can approach, perhaps at no fee or at a reduced fee. And they get this kind of information to be followed on eventually by the private practitioners. But there's a role that government there can play in helping out the initial first steps, which should be the role of government in this kind of question. And it ties into a wider aspect. We mentioned earlier on education. Education is crucial. Education of what there is, but also education about entrepreneurship, what it means to go your own way, to start off your own thing. Include as well a huge emphasis on failure. And that is where we have to start, even from the formal education, from a very young age, our young children back at their school. There's nothing wrong in them failing. If we instill a kind of culture from a very young age, then they will not think twice of starting their own thing and fail. What's wrong with that? But it is all a whole series of initiatives taken together, which will eventually lead to people appreciating where they can get information from access to finance, how they can go and access finance. And why not? If they go belly up, they can restart again.
So we found that we've tried to de-jargonize our site as much as possible, but there's only so much you can de-jargonize by. So we had a concierge calls with an Indian entrepreneur, I think in South India somewhere, and they didn't understand the basics of finance. And I've worked in venture capital and banking. We wasn't a financier. I don't think of myself as a financier, but there's basic financial knowledge you need, because if you're going to engage with investors, you want to have some. They don't expect you to be an accountant, but they want you to have, or a lawyer, but they want you to have some understanding what a balance sheet might be, some understanding what profitability is or what revenues are, some understanding the cost of acquisition of customers. And on the legal side, I'm not a lawyer either, but I've had to become familiar with ideas like intellectual property, what are trademarks, what is know-how, what is show-how. People. We can't be the whole one-stop shop for everything yet, and trying to help people on this way. But there's a lot of insight and knowledge required to be built up, so that by the time the entrepreneurs hit the venture, or particularly the venture, but any investor market, including angels, actually more so angels in some cases, that there's some financial, legal, and structural kind of competency that they can get across. Because people they're not giving you, they're actually not like donations, actually investing. They're putting money into your business. You need to understand what you're going to do with it and how it's going to be deployed and what things cost in the business. Our law firm in London, which is co-hosting our event on the 12th, has a very interesting program called Equip, and they give 50% off legal fees to come. They have a program for entrepreneurs who have to pitch to be part of this program. They have various things like our events, other events they do, and they give 50% off legal fees, understanding that entrepreneurs find it hard in early stages to engage with smart people like that. And we found it fantastic, that kind of program, because it's enabled us to access very impressive lawyers, do all kind of tasks from employment to intellectual property to investment agreements, all kind of agreements. So much legalese needs to be done in a business to put together correctly.
Just to add a few things to that. So I think one of the things in the US, again, sorry if I talk too much about like tech startups, but it is very, very standardized. I think we were talking about this on the phone. Like basically every tech startup in the US has the same set of documents. So you know exactly what the terms are, you know, like you can Google everything and everybody follows the same thing. So there's no trying to understand different structures, etc. Like investors, in fact, won't even look at a company if it's got a different, unusual structure. One of the things as well, you were talking about people or resources available over here. I was speaking to someone at university recently, and one of the problems I think Malta has is that there's not enough folks going, again, for tech, going through like BSc IT or specializing in tech. And when they do, they have so many job offers from iGaming companies and other tech companies that if you want to do a startup, it's really hard to find the people here. So that's probably another one of the issues over here, that human resources are limited.
And then also there is another one that
yeah, Altaro, I mean, yeah, and Hotjar had like, but if you're going to start something and you want a co-founder here, you need to be able to take that risk.
I agree and I disagree, because in truth, the majority of companies that we're managing to attract are managing to find resources. Not all of them would be Maltese. Obviously, our approach to startups is also one, because we understand that startups are small and they might need a limited amount of human resources, but highly qualified individuals.
I don't
It is
mean
something that we are
a co-founder. So if you're asking someone to join you to build a project and maybe spend a year without a salary, like that's something that people over here find really difficult. Like I can get a super high salary out of a company, I can go buy a home, like why take the risk? And this is the thing, like if you do take a risk, there's obviously big potential rewards, but you know, no risk.
So Anna Maria has a point. And then if we can go to there's a question from Joseph who's been waiting here for a while. So if we could, Anna Maria maybe comment, and then Joseph's question. And then are we ready with the? Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Another question.
There's another question.
Okay, so maybe two more questions, but I'm just concerned about the timing.
It's good that we have a question.
Food and drink. No,
Yeah.
I'm happy to stimulate the conversation. I just know the hotel want to provide the food and drink by a certain time. We want to give you food and drink before you go home. Don't want to miss that bit. So not giving doggy bags out today. So perhaps Anna Maria.
Just a comment further to what Francina was mentioning about the support, the specific guidance, consultancy support, and so on. I think there is really a lot of room, most probably, for improvement there. And there have been a number of schemes. Malta Enterprise had a business advisory scheme under the EU funds. There have been for the last 7 years, the SME consultancy grant, and so on and so forth. What happens sometimes, I think even the process of application for those small schemes is difficult. So sometimes that has to be, I'm a consultant myself, and I have supported a lot of companies under those schemes. But for them, sometimes to go through it, it's difficult. And then sometimes they would say, I don't want necessarily to go for the full business plan. I want a few hours of your time and guidance. And that sometimes is not funded. So if you can have this kind of schemes, or innovation vouchers or consultancy vouchers or whatever you want to call them, that are of different sizes and that are easy to be accessed by different entrepreneurs at different stages, probably that's useful, because not all of them would like to go for a full-blown, sort of service.
Joseph,
if I could put the question, because it's practically what you're saying. So Joe Samot, Malta Enterprise. I was responsible for a while for KBIC, which is the business incubator we have in Qodeo. I was responsible for setting up the Life Sciences Park. We have some 40 tenants there now. And I was at MCST as the director for national research funds on the island. But now I'm director of the Malta Innovation Hub. We've just today closed a scheme which was European funded to help companies put together an innovation blueprint. We had hundreds of companies interested, but finally only 10 applied. Now, this is exactly what Anna Maria Pontes is saying. People are scared of putting paperwork together. Now, you have to put in a de minimis declaration. These things are there. And my question, really is to Philip. Philip, you've been through it in another country, facing venture capitalists. Will the venture capitalists give you any money if you don't have a decent business plan?
So I'll be honest, like raising an angel round, we'd never wrote a business plan. Just a pitch deck, barely a pitch deck, sometimes just an email. But again, they're investing really because they know, okay, yeah, they might have met us, they get to know us over time, and like, all right, we trust you. It is very high risk, but in our mind, okay, we had a bit of a sketch of, okay, this is what we're going to do with the money. But it is, honestly, it is very, very informal compared to what I believe government funding is.
Probably the biggest
VC then gets a bit more complicated as you go like Series A, Series B, then you start needing to be doing due diligence and your lawyers get involved. And it's kind of like joking because like over there, a lawyer costs $1,800 an hour. And every time he tells you like, well, it's a beautiful day, like, well, that's $20 right there. But it's a very different world, yes, VC to, I guess, government or.
Philip may know about this. In the US, there's something called SBA, the Small Business Administration. What they actually provide to potential entrepreneurs is hours with specialists for free at no charge, where an entrepreneur talks to them and they help them through the whole process with the initial SBA application, the preparation of a business plans, doing costings, and approaching potential investors. I think that's something that may be missing here locally. And that is, I think it's something that, as in the US, is government funded. It's at no cost at the individual. It's a simple matter of
I think it's
pairing
the way
how to invest in
we should
potential.
take as feedback.
Yeah.
But
it is
obviously also, until 2 days ago, there was a similar session at the Chamber of Commerce. So let's, take ownership of what we can improve, but also not just put it on, as we were saying, on government.
Yeah, but
because the entrepreneur needs also to push. There's an entrepreneur and there's an entrepreneur.
It's not just government. Like, so one thing in the US, for instance, is if you're doing a startup, okay, you're serious, whatever, most like white shoe firms will give you $10,000-15,000 of credit, or at least deferred fees, just to get incorporated, get your documents done. But that's normal because they know that if you're successful, it's kind of a small investment, $15,000, and hopefully you're going to be spending hundreds of thousands of dollars down the line. I mean, the checks I used to sign for our company, like, it used to kill me, but that's how it works.
It's similar to that program at the UK law firm, that 50% off discount, similar kind of thing, that they want long-term clients.
Yeah, I mean,
so they think if they get in, they know that a number of the firms won't exist beyond that, but they're getting into a bunch of firms. Also, the other thing, actually, from professionals' perspective, I used to work at EY many years ago, so acceleration type stuff, and actually work with early stage or growth businesses and entrepreneurs was exciting work for the professionals. It was much more exciting with working with large corporates, and it was actually a way of retaining staff in professional services firms to expose them to interesting business. Now, obviously, in Silicon Valley, there's huge law firms that just do early stage work, but outside those markets, it's slightly different. So maybe also here that there's an incentive beyond the long-term client opportunity here, but also for the professionals to learn and enjoy the work and be exposed to something a bit different, a bit more exotic than they might usually deal with. And that might be interesting, because the way that CMS, this law firm in the UK, apparently does it is that they give these discounted hours, what's called golden hours, up to a certain number of hours per year at 50% off, to private law firm doing this themselves. It's quite an unusual program. And apparently internally within the partnership, it's all bought off and all agreed to inside the partnership, so that everyone understands it, so they can cross-subsidize each other. So it's not like one partner takes a hit, they share it across the firm, so that actually it kind of just, it gets buffered and then it's used as a business development tool. We had one other question about, but I'm eager to get you to network and we get thrown out of here and to have a chance to have food and drink. So there's a question about there. Even with my eyesight, I can't quite read your tag sideways. I'm not that way oriented.
It's Alex Borg.
Thank you.
From GBU Ventures. I have a question about Qodeo. I have some experience in managing a startup accelerator on behalf of government. And so I was exposed to a number of startup platforms such as F6S. I'm sure you're familiar with them, F6S, Traction. And so I was interested to know what is Qodeo's differentiator with respect to such platforms.
Okay, well, the first thing is that we start off as a global database of venture capital. And what turned out was when we surveyed entrepreneurs and VCs, they weren't as interested in data as everybody thought everybody would be. So everybody thinks everybody's a data wonk. And it's a bit like if you buy a car, most people don't look underneath the hood, they just want the car to drive. And we found that most VCs even wanted the solution of the inbound deal flow, the noise cancellation of be able to review inbound opportunities in a filtered kind of way as an additional source of opportunities for them. And we found that entrepreneurs didn't understand most of it. It goes back to jargon kind of thing, and didn't want to spend hours and time doing that, but actually wanted matches. They wanted to know where to start. So, so what we created was this matching capability. And so we created our own algorithms that pick up data on venture capital firms we collect, and the entrepreneurs on the other side, and automatically match them and feed them those matches. And the way we do that through the algorithms, we've actually built these algorithms based upon certain sort of, I suppose, quasi-scientific process, understand what makes those matches tick in different kind of sectors and stages and locations, etc. We also pick up the data ourselves in various ways, including we interview venture and private equity firms in person. And all the factors we're looking at is not what deals were done last week or last year, whatever, but actually what the qualitative factors that make a difference in the deal happening. And so we actually score certain attributes about the venture capital firms in those interviews, and over 1,000 globally contributing in that data into the system. And that helps with finesse and to choose who goes where. The other thing is very much the model. So as a business model, we don't charge VCs, which is quite unusual. People say they're the ones with the cash, but there's probably only about 25,000 venture and private equity firms in the world. I used to work for two. I know they're hard to sell to. They won't pay for anything. And it's a small market, whereas there are 582 million entrepreneurs globally from the research done in INSEAD and Cambridge in the entrepreneur market, trying to see some kind of venture or private equity or angel type investment. So we looked, that's the big market. That's obviously people who are seeking the funds, who want the funds, and let's put together a SaaS type product. So we're not a broker, don't take commission, we're not a crowdfunder. We don't hold the funds, we just point people in the right direction. So the focus was let's create an agnostic, easy, low cost, easy to access platform. And we've had a very strong focus also, which is quite a differentiator, in what we call remote and diverse communities also the last year. So I was in North Carolina the other week. Fascinating market, huge amounts of entrepreneurship, but often bypassed by other parts of the US. Regional and diverse communities probably are 80% of the market we can both serve and help, and they tend to be overlooked by others. So our marketing, our focus has very much been towards those underserved effectively in the last year or two as well. So between the business model, the kinds of information we gather, the matching algorithms themselves, the way we do the matching, the pricing, etc., the whole and the focus in terms of markets is quite different. We're also very broad in terms of, sometimes it's difficult to do it, that we service both the early stage or obvious kind of tech kind of sectors, but also mid-market. And mid-market is something that's often very much forgotten by people, but a very large portion of VC and P firms on our platform are what we call mid-market. So they're focusing on later stage deals. And typically, family succession, which we didn't even talk about today, particularly growth of privately owned businesses where the entrepreneur might have one of our investors is a person who runs a business worth over $500 million in Australia, and he used us to help to identify private equity firms he should talk to for his own fundraising for his own project. So the mid-market is very much overlooked. There are certain mid-market or later stage data plays, but not doing the matching as such. So we see as being quite a different kind of offering from that kind of perspective. Is there anything else at all before we wrap at all? Well, thank you for that question. One final question, but can I just ask Monica before we go any further, what is the status with the food and drink? Because we want to feed people here. They've been sitting here listening to me for ages. Is it coming? They're waiting for us. Oh dear. Oh dear. Well, I didn't see it come in here, and I thought it might silently come in the back of the room. Well, we do want to make you, give you the opportunity to network and also help you graze on some food and drink. So maybe they can bring the food in, and maybe into the side here. I think we had some tables on the side, and enable you to network. We'll pull the chairs back a bit and just do the final questions. We do that.
Hi, I met you from currently J Malta. It's an educational institution. We mentioned education a couple of times. So I think education is quite key for this discussion. Obviously, we need to make our entrepreneurs and our future entrepreneurs more aware of the financial mix and what is out there, what's available, and the idea of equity finance and raising finances. So that is critical. However, we also need to educate a bit our investor side. And by investors, I mean the general public. There are roughly 24 billion in our savings banks, of which the vast majority is households. So we have money sleeping there in the bank accounts where we could be actually diverting them onto innovation, onto startups, onto ideas. which unfortunately we don't do. I've had various discussions with David, so this is not news to him. But for example, even when we put the COVID schemes and investment measures, we put some of the investment measures on property, where you get reduced stamp duty and everything to try and keep the energy, the momentum going. When in other countries, like in the UK, we saw schemes like Restart Britain, where we gave tax incentives for people to invest in ideas and innovation that could solve problems. So the government is doing a very good job. I think the startup ecosystem improved drastically in the last 5-6 years. But I think there's more. And I think we always overlook the private investor. And before we go into VCs, attracting VCs, high net worth business angels, we need to create the momentum and track record within the general community. Because then when VCs look into Malta and say, okay, there's activity, I see there's investment. Because so far, every investment we promote and we see is because a Maltese firm went abroad, not because it's local.
So do you want to ask, before we wrap up, do you want to ask the panel or a particular panelist a question related to that, or?
No, I think it was more of a comment for the discussion.
I'm in complete agreement with it.
And
Very fair comment.
if I can just put one last comment on the awareness and the issues of funding, they are surely there. We need to make people aware more, but we also need to make sure that our young entrepreneurs know that sales is also a major funding opportunity. And if they don't go out to sell and speak to customers, because customers could become investors. Because I meet a lot of entrepreneurs that get support from audit firms, from advisory firms, from legal firms, free of charge to set up business plans, go for funding and everything. And they haven't spoken to one customer yet. I mean, we need to push this mentality that if they go to customers, that is one potential avenue of revenue because you're selling.
I don't want to be controversial, but in terms of the investment, like imagine this. I mean, whenever I see even angels that I speak to, like if you're going to invest $50,000 in a startup, be ready to basically burn that $50,000 because the likelihood is it's going to go to zero. So it's not an investment for my parents or most of them.
Yes, but if your parents can't come together with other parents,
I would tell them invest in something that they understand.
It's a different
stable. In fact,
what perhaps
even in the US,
an idea that we
that we can get there once the market matures. Perhaps what we need to,
it's low risk.
No risk.
Angel is extremely.
Cannot invest if there won't be a government collateral.
Let's call a spade a spade. What we need to do first of all.
I might have a bit of a different, like I don't think government needs to get involved. But it's just like even in the US, if you invest in startups, you need to have certain assets. You need to be able to understand.
We need to change investment.
It is high risk.
I mean, there are.
I think the scenario is not only about parents that have money in the bank that or for the entrepreneur that doesn't want to know to tell others that he is raising funds. There's also others in between. There are young entrepreneurs that have been successful and are interested to invest in new companies. So we cannot just put everyone in the same
for sure.
box.
But it's just like whoever's going to invest
there's
needs
no
to understand
latent
the
capital. There's a lot of dormant capital.
I think just to try to summarize, so we probably do have to try to wrap because otherwise there will be no time for this famous food and drink, or maybe Monica's drunk it all and she's on the floor by now. But hopefully not. But so I mean that's interesting discussion. I mean, obviously people can have those discussions over the drink shortly. I mean it's interesting. I mean in the UK and US there's what's called sophisticated investor, and you have to be screened some kind of way. It's one of the issues we've had about allowing angels onto our platform because you do have to screen, and there's different regulations in different countries about how you screen and how you verify. And there's been very poor in some ways verification in some ways, but there's some kind of questions you have to answer before you can get into certain things. Crowdfunding certainly took off enormously in the UK, allowing very small investors for very small amounts to get involved, but there were also tax incentives put around that. So the problem is then often investors, the small investors, are more focused on the tax incentives than they are on the businesses, and so they can get a little bit cart before the horse. But very interesting discussions. Now, if what we can do, I want to thank everybody here. Unfortunately, Abigail had to go. I want to thank everybody in the audience for such a sort of vociferous, lively debate. There's obviously a huge amount of opportunity here. The title, I think, of our Malta report the other year, which we're going to send you, is Malta Future Startup Hub. There clearly is a huge amount of activity here. So we're not just focused on startups, but there's a huge amount of entrepreneurship and entrepreneurialism here we'd like to work with. So I want to thank Anthony, I want to thank Stanley, I want to thank Philip, and I want to thank Anna Maria. I would also like to thank the AV team. I didn't catch everybody's names, but Mark and John, and obviously Monica from our team, who's flown over here to help organise this and has been trying to organise this food and drink for you. I feel we've been talking about for a while. But please, before you go, keep in touch with us. We'll try to do some more work here. We're going to try and follow this up in various ways. It was a very lively debate. Sign up to Qodeo. It's qodeo.com, and wow, Qodeo gives you 50% off. And any questions for us, just send them to team@qodeo.com, and poor Monica will have to deal with them later. Thank you very much for everybody. And I haven't forgotten the prize. The prize. So can before hopefully. Well, if somebody gets a bottle of scotch rather than a glass of wine. So if perhaps we can just maybe get Anna Maria to, if Monica brings up the cards, Anna Maria will choose numbers 1 and 2, and if you can try and, we'll have to try and make a note on them to know who's who. So Anna Maria, go for number 1. I hope you like scotch. You like scotch? So you win the scotch and a year's free service. And number 2 is a box of chocolates. And so on the back. So you get a box of chocolates and a year's free service. Let me make sure I've got a number 2 on here, number 1 on here. Thank you very much, everybody.